Right, okay then. So just to introduce ourselves this evening, I'm Mark Owen, one of TAVIP's trustees, and I'm joined by my colleague.
I'm Karina Gregory. I'm another trustee of TAVIP.
And Julian, who's our development officer, is on the call as well. So welcome to Julian and welcome to
Mm.
yourselves, Alex, Padma, Nigel, and Ray. So welcome. Okay, so Karina, what we're going to do this evening? You're going to tell everyone that, aren't
I
you?
am. When you stop talking. So this evening we're going to explore the different options of magnification. Um, so um, but also additional features as well. So it might be that you might not necessarily need to magnify the screen on your device straight away. There are different features that you can activate um, either instead of magnification or along with magnification to make the screen easier to see. So we're going to be exploring those. Mark's going to go through some considerations of things that you might want to think about before in terms of choosing a device. Then I'm going to talk about Android and the magnification features in Android. And then Mark will cover Apple. The magnification facility on iOS. And its associated magnification features. Then we're going to look at PC-based options. So we're going to look at Windows Magnifier, which is the inbuilt magnification program for Microsoft Windows, and also options that you need to purchase independently that you can run on Microsoft Windows operating system. So if I hand back over to Mark, we can get started with key considerations.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Karina. So if you could just put yourselves on mute, that would be greatly appreciated. And obviously we'll have opportunities for people just to be able to come in at varying points throughout the evening. Okay, then. So first of all, just a few key considerations really in terms of choosing device, whatever platform it is you decide to go for, whether it's PC, Mac, or Windows, or iPhone or Android. I suppose the key thing really as a starting point is what do you actually want it for? Are you just wanting to surf the web, access some social media, perhaps watch some videos, listen to some radio content, perhaps send a few emails? And for most people, probably a phone or a tablet-based solution, could well be enough. If you're wanting to get more in depth in terms of going into education or employment, then you probably are going to be looking at something that's PC based. So it very much depends on what it is that you want to do. And alongside that, of course, is how much you're prepared to spend, because some of the things that we're going to talk about tonight, particularly with the Android side of things, you can get with a relatively inexpensive smartphone. So some of the things that we're going to talk about tonight with Android, you can do for well under £100. So as I say, it very much comes down to whether you want a phone, a PC, or a tablet. But one of the things that I always say to people, whatever you're doing in terms of magnification, the screen is key. And the screen's got to be key, really, because it's the screen that you're using as the space on which to access the magnification. So there are lots of different types of screen, but essentially, most of them that you'll be familiar with are what are called LCD, which is a liquid crystal display. And the way in which that works is that the screen is lit from the back, so it's what's called backlit, and the images, in effect, are presented on that. Now, the better quality ones the more you pay, the better quality that tends to be. And when we're thinking about quality, we're talking about a few things. We're thinking about how bright it is, so the level of brightness, because obviously some people really like things to be bright. And again, depending on what environment you're in, will determine how bright you need it to be. We're also thinking about the level of contrast, because particularly if you get close to a screen of something like a less expensive laptop, as you get closer, the screen will begin to look more grey. So you have to be mindful of things like that. But one of the other key things is what we call the response time. And that's how quickly the image on the screen updates itself. So not so much necessarily an issue now, but certainly a few years ago, and certainly still with some of the photo quality screens, as you enlarge, once you're enlarging something, as you move the mouse around to view whatever it is that you're viewing, as you move from left to right, that image will ghost. So it will give the impression that the text is almost disappearing, which obviously makes it incredibly difficult to see. So it just exacerbates any difficulties that you're having. And this is where the response time comes in, because you need a screen that updates itself and responds very, very quickly, normally around 1 or 2 milliseconds, so that as you move your mouse around to view the area, you don't get that ghosting that I've just talked about. One of the other types of screens is what we call an OLED, which is like an organic LED screen. You'll hear about them a lot on particularly things like Samsung phones. They'll talk about OLED or AMOLED, and the more expensive iPhones, the Pro models, and they're the ones that tend to have this type of screen. And they are starting to become available for PCs. Certain laptop brands, such as Asus, again, will have an OLED screen. Now, the beauty of an OLED screen is that the contrast is incredibly clear. Contrast is incredibly good. Because unlike the LCD, which I said is lit from the back, and when you look at it, it always looks a bit grey because you've got the element of backlighting. With an OLED screen, the black is completely black because of the way it works. Hence, the contrast between the colours is much, much sharper. The image is much more crisp, and you don't get that ghosting in the same way that you do with some of the cheaper LCD models. So what I always say to people is, if you're thinking about the screen, the device, the screen is absolutely key. Now, obviously, the extent to which you notice some of these things or not is going to be determined by the nature of your vision. And it's as individual as each one of you are. So what I always say to people is go and look at different models. Try where possible to have a look at them in different lighting conditions, particularly depending on what your use is going to be, and get the best screen that you can for yourself, given your circumstances. So screen quality is really, really key. Now, obviously, some people prefer a screen that's much larger as well. Now, again, I suppose it depends on your field of vision, really, as to how much of that is an issue for you. Myself personally, I'm sat here with a 24-inch screen, but with my field of vision, I can only really get a third of it at any one time. So whatever I do, I'm going to have to turn my head to be able to get the various thirds of it. I will never get it in totality. And we'll come back to that issue of visual field and just the area that you can view when we actually talk about some of the bits of the software later on as well. So that's a really, really quick summary in terms of some key considerations, and we're quite good actually already from a timing point of view. So I don't know perhaps whether before we move on, does anyone want to any questions on that or any little bits of clarification? Okay, anything I missed, Karina?
No, I don't think so. No.
All right, marvelous.
One thing I would just like to add is that people will naturally try to give you recommendations.
Yeah.
Because that's within people's nature, but as Mark says, it's just to reiterate really that it is a very individual thing, and it's very much based on your needs.
Okay, Ray had got his hand up. Ray.
Yeah, the screens that you just mentioned, or the new improved screens, OLED and AMOLED, was it?
Yeah.
Presumably, if they're working in conjunction with modern day cameras, does that mean that when you're using things like Be My Eyes, the person assisting you is going to see a much better and clearer image?
No, in that sense, it won't make any difference to what they see at the other end, because they will see whatever your camera is showing on their phone. So the OLED screen only makes a difference to what it is that you actually see.
Okay. Yeah.
The camera quality makes a difference to what they see.
Mm-hmm. Fine. Okay.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, then right. So if we're good to go on, then Karina's going to spend a little bit of time actually talking to you about some of the things that you can do before you even begin to do any screen enlargement, because there are options that might work for people without actually having to do anything else. So, Karina.
Okay, thank you, Mark. So, one of the first options, and one of possibly the most common options, is a high contrast option. And this appears in every option that we're covering tonight. And there are different versions of high contrast. So, and a lot nowadays will allow you to customize what you want high contrast to look like. So basically, in a nutshell, high contrast makes a contrast between the background and certain elements of the screen, like text or buttons or different components on a web page, say, more visible. Within that, you can also change background colors, or you can change text colors. So for instance, talking about the background, some people might prefer, say, a lighter yellow background to see things. Other people might prefer blue. Some people might prefer red. And then it's very much based on individual preference. But it should, you are able to customize that. And again, with the text, now just one thing to bear in mind is that in high contrast mode, it will convert all text to the color that you choose. So if you were looking at something that needed or that had text color coded, it would remove that from that document or whatever you were looking at. So that's high contrast. And then there are other aspects that you can change as well. So the mouse pointer is another consideration. So you within certainly within Windows, you can change the size or the shape of the mouse pointer, and that again will be an individual choice. But you can have it to, say, maybe look more 3D if that's what you prefer, or if you find that easier to see. Or you could have it to make it look narrower. You can even have it to change appearance depending on where you are on the screen. So say in a menu, it will allow you to see one particular style of mouse pointer whereas in the main body of a document or in a spreadsheet or whatever you use it will display as another. Then the other thing that I wanted to mention as well in this section is, and it's something that I stumbled across when I was in a previous job, and that was Mark was talking about the contrast of the screen. Again, on all devices that can be changed. So you can have very high contrast where things will be very prominent. So things like icons on the desktop, menu items, they will be very, very visible. And you can have it low contrast as well. Now, one thing that I discovered purely by accident was when it was getting darker, my laptop screen was also getting darker, which wasn't really very helpful to me because I rely on quite a bright screen. And what I found was it was responding to the external conditions. So at night, when it was getting dark earlier at night, it was going into what's called nighttime mode. And that was naturally making the screen darker. Now that can be turned off. Again, that's across all devices. It can be useful for saving power because with the brightness of the screen can put more of a drain on the battery. But it's something that you might want to be mindful of if you are, if you do need something to remain consistent, and that can have an impact on you. I think that is all of the things I wanted to cover. Have you got any, Mark?
Yeah, so a couple of bits that I was going to cover. Karina's looked at things from the perspective of the PC. I'm just going to bring in a few things from the perspective of phones and tablets. One of the really obvious ones actually is on a phone or a tablet is just to increase the font size. With so many devices, you can simply increase the font or text size. And for some people, doing that can be enough. Another really key one is to switch it from light mode to dark mode, particularly if you suffer with the effects of brightness. Naturally, on light mode, you've got a white background with black text, you get an awful lot of glare. Switching it round to dark mode gives you white text on black background and immediately reduces the glare. What you'll find is, particularly with Android phones, the same thing has different names. So it might be called dark mode, it might be called dark theme, it might be called night theme, but essentially it's that same thing that you're looking for. Black background, white text. And one of the other things that we do quite often is that people tend to have background pictures on their phones as well. So it might be a picture of the dog or their cat or their partner or their favorite place or whatever it is. And just actually by getting rid of that and having a black background instead makes it much easier to be able to see your way around the phone screen. And what I'm doing is it's a bit, this little bit's a bit difficult because naturally we haven't got a separate camera. So I'm just holding my phone screen to the camera so that you can see that I've got a purely black background, which means that the icons for the different apps stand out much more clearly. And again, that's another thing that you can do. If you don't need 27 different apps, don't have 27 different apps on your home screen. Just keep the things that you need. So with mine, I know that I've got my Lookout by Google in the top right corner and my Wii Zoom magnifier in the top right corner. You know exactly where something is, so therefore it's much easier to be able to go for that. Okay, So just little things in terms of organization of the actual phone itself can make things much easier to manage, because in effect you're removing the clutter, you're making it easy to see. On some of the really old phones, you'll see it called invert. Now, invert, if you go back to photography and think about the principle of a negative, that's what it does. It makes everything that's white black and vice versa. So people look at photographs and it looks a bit scary. So the old phones used to do invert, still available, but the newer phones now, which most people will have really, have got things like the dark mode feature. So as we've said in this section, there are things that you can do without actually using any magnification at all. So it's just worth considering those. So we're going to sort of move on, and Karina's going to introduce the magnification side of things now on Android. Okay, so Karina, there you go, Android magnification.
Lovely, thank you. So, just as Mark said, with any sort of magnification, the key is to reduce the clutter, and that is personally what I like about phones and tablets. Is that you've got a lot less clutter. Right, so Android magnification. There are two. Android is designed by Google, and they have their own magnification system. But also, Samsung have their own features as well, and they all things to do with accessibility within Android phones will be within settings and accessibility. Now, as Mark said, there are numerous. Now, I'm using a Samsung phone, this will be very sort of Samsung based, because I have used Google's system as well. I also use TalkBack, which is Google's product. But they are very similar in how they operate. So one thing to bear in mind, as Mark said, one of the things that you can do before you magnify is change the or dark mode, as it's called now. It is still in some places referred to as invert colors. And one of the biggest difficulties with the inverting of the colors, and this will apply to any device that you use, is that if you naturally have a dark background on something, it will automatically make that background light. So that is one thing that you do need to be mindful of, and that is where dark mode is better, because dark mode will make everything dark. So Samsung has a great number of features for accessibility, as does Android. So the magnification is helpfully called magnifier, and to access that, you can tap three times on the screen and magnification will launch. Now, you might very well need to enable it before you do that. So as I've said, to get into the magnification settings, you would need to go into the phone settings and accessibility or accessibility manager. Now, within there are a lot of different things, and it might be that you can customize it to suit your needs as a one-off. So if that isn't the case, then there are options within the magnification to be able to go and change it. But to enable, once you've enabled the magnification, you can use your 2 fingers on the screen, opening them. So if you place your 2 fingers on the screen and move one up and one down the screen, it will magnify the screen for you. And that will change the level of magnification that you want to use. Now, there are 2 ways of magnifying the screen. And this again will very much depend on your eye condition or how much of the screen you actually want to look at. So you can magnify the whole screen, which will make everything on the screen bigger. And to enable you to navigate around the phone with that, you need to use 2 fingers to navigate your way around the screen to find what you're looking for. But then there is also a lens magnification. And that lens magnification will allow you to open or to view a very small part of the screen. And it will magnify the part that the focus is over at any one particular point. Now, I've been advised that for people with very low vision, the lens magnification can actually make it more confusing and harder to follow. Personally, I use full screen magnification if I need to magnify the screen. I navigate, as I said, my way around the screen with 2 fingers, but I also use have TalkBack as a backup as well. The other thing that I found incredibly helpful with Android phones is its ability to magnify through the camera. So you could be looking at something, and again, if you want to make what you are looking at larger, you would use your 2 fingers to move one up, one down the screen to magnify the image to the size that you want it to be. And that is incredibly helpful if you just want a quick magnifier, say to look at something, or you're in a shop, or you want to know cooking instructions for something, and you just want it real quick. You can just get your phone, open the camera and magnify it. Again, with Android phones, there are the other accessibility features. So you've got things like the ability to change the contrast, change the screen brightness, and also to change the keyboard layout. So you can have different coloured keyboards with different coloured text on the buttons to indicate what buttons there are. Again, you can magnify any part of the screen at any time just by using your 2 fingers. And I think that covers mainly all of the magnification features in Android.
Yeah, I'm gonna try. I'm just gonna try and give an example. So on my screen now, I have 24 icons. So as I pinch in, I can get the magnification to such a large extent that only one of those 24 icons is actually visible. So it's a very, very powerful thing. But of course, as you're moving around the screen with your two fingers, you're magnifying a very small part of the screen on essentially something that is already a small screen, i.e. your phone. I'll just demonstrate the lens feature. Now, the lens, again, if you imagine the principle of a magnifying glass, you're moving the magnifier around the actual screen, and what's underneath your magnifier is what is being enlarged. So they are things that take a little bit of getting used to say the least. But once people get confident and comfortable with them, so as I move in effect, I'm magnifying now only a very small area of the screen that's underneath my lens. So it's like the same principle of using a magnifier over a piece of paper. But again, I've seen many people who can use magnification on their Android phones incredibly effectively, very quickly move around the screen, very quickly zoom in and out to adjust the magnification to the level that they need. And as Karina says, don't forget also that the phone has its own inbuilt magnification to magnify what's on its screen, but it can also be used either in the camera mode or in a specific magnification app, such as WeZoom, or indeed Samsung's own built-in magnification app now, to act in effect as a pocket handheld magnifier for you as well. So some really useful features there in terms of Android. I'll move on to Apple in a moment, because the principles are broadly the same. But just before I do, has anyone got any questions in terms of that for Karina or I?
So is the WeZoom app the better one, Mark, for Android?
I think if the WeZoom app will work for all of them, it's only on the later versions of Samsung's Android with their own system that they put in the built-in, because you've got two things. You've got magnifier,
yeah,
which is like the actual magnifying glass that Samsung only introduced fairly recently on Android. I think it was Android 12. But then you've got the inbuilt actual magnification that magnifies the screen.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, but the one that people will be able to get, irrespective of what device they have, what Android device they have, is something like WeZoom. That's one of the best ones now that people tend to recommend. So I would tend to go for WeZoom. The beauty of using an actual magnification glass app over a camera is that the camera lenses tend to be optimized to take pictures at distance, whereas the magnifying apps tend to optimize the lens more for close-up, and they also have things like the color filters to get your yellow text, black background, etc. type thing as well. But it's a cheaper option, provided people are comfortable with it. It's certainly cheaper than going out and buying a bespoke handheld electronic magnifier. Ray, you'd got your hand up.
Yeah, a couple of questions regarding the Android. Well, I'll say from the outset, I'm one of the few people, few VI people that don't have a smartphone. I'm currently wading through the quagmire, trying to decide, do I go for an Apple device or an Android? Yeah. And I'm a little confused regarding Android when there's stock Android, which I'm assuming every Android phone has. Then you've got Google's TalkBack, which is an enhanced version of stock Android, and Samsung's accessibility features, which again is an enhanced version of the stock Android. Well, first of all, what I've just said, is that correct?
So Google is like stock or vanilla Android. So Google Android, you'll get obviously on Google's own phones. You'll get it on things like not Nokia's as well, for argument's sake. What some of the other manufacturers do, and it's mainly people like Samsung now, they take Android and they customize it. They put all their own extra bits on it. They design their own front end, and they design their own slightly different versions of some of the apps. So one of the issues I have from a large font point of view is that certainly up until the most recent version of Google Android, the large fonts that you could get out of a Google phone were not particularly large. It wasn't very good at all. In fact, it was really not very helpful. Whereas Samsung, if you want to enlarge the fonts, they have a much wider range of much higher level of font enlargement. The TalkBack, Google produce it, and then Samsung now have their own slightly. It's the same thing, but Samsung put out their own version, which, in all honesty, tends to lag a little bit behind Google. It's still TalkBack, but it's because Samsung are sort of they tend to be slower in terms of updates than Google do.
Well, if I understood you correctly, Karina, you said essentially you use the Samsung Android suite of accessibility features.
Yes,
but occasionally you revert to TalkBack. So can I assume correctly from that you can use the two, TalkBack and Samsung's accessibility features, in conjunction with one another without any kind of conflict?
Well,
or does that only apply in certain situations?
As Mark says, Samsung's version of its screen reader is also called TalkBack. So you can use the two together. So you can use magnification and speech to support each other. But essentially, because I'm using a Samsung phone, they are both Samsung Samsung equivalents of Google's products.
Yeah, in effect, it's to all intents and purposes, it is the same, except Samsung put the same software out through their platform, and Google put the software out through their own platform.
Yeah.
So do other manufacturers such as Sony and Motorola have their own accessibility features as well? Their own set?
They have that. Most of those will use the stock Android ones. I haven't looked. It tends to be either stock Android, Google, whether it's put out through a Nokia or a Google's own phone or a Honor or some of these other manufacturers, or it tends to be Samsung. You know, the smaller manufacturers, by nature of them being smaller manufacturers, tend to do less by way of customization. You know, purely simply because it costs them a lot of money to do it. Yeah. Okay.
And just one quickie, because I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because it's not the topic for tonight. But it appears to me that for example, Samsung's enhanced accessibility features, it seems to me that there are more advantages for somebody wanting to enhance large print, color contrast, etc., than there is for somebody using solely speech.
It's a different. I think it's like you say, it's a totally different session in that sense. But if we'd had a conversation sort of 6-7 years ago, possibly more, yeah, then iPhone was way ahead.
Yeah.
Now there is very little difference between, if you were starting from a standing start, there is very, very little difference between Apple and Apple's own voiceover and talkback. Some people will disagree with me, and the list will debate it forever and a day, I'm sure. But in reality, there is very little difference.
Okay.
There are other determinants, such as what you want to pay for the phone sometimes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
So I'll mention Apple briefly.
Yeah.
So much of this, as we say, is about terminology. Samsung, Android call making the screen contents larger, they call it magnification. Apple call exactly the same thing zoom. So what on Android is magnification, on Apple is zoom. It's exactly the same thing. You're making the contents of the screen larger through viewing a smaller area of it. Again, it's in their accessibility menu. And the difference is that to access the Apple one, you have to move up to utilize the Apple one, you have to move around the screen using 3 finger ends together. Whereas with Android, as Karina said, you're moving around the screen using 2 finger ends together. I have to say, I do find the Apple one a little bit more difficult because of that reason. It's slightly more manipulation, as it were, to manipulate the 3 finger ends and to pinch in and out to do the decrease and increase in enlargement. Again, Apple have the option to be able to switch between enlargement of the whole screen to the approach where you're enlarging the screen in part using a lens type feature. So the principles of them are broadly the same in that what they're trying to achieve is you're making the content of the screen bigger, but the way in which you do it, the actual keystrokes that you're applying are slightly different. And the Apple one is you're moving around with 3 fingers, whereas the Samsung one, the Android one, you're moving around with 2. But as I say, they are broadly the same. I think one of the things to point out as well is naturally what we've said about Android and what we've said about Apple are both true, whether it's the phone or a tablet. Of course, with a tablet, you've got the luxury of enlarging a much larger screen. So obviously, if you need a certain level of print size, in order to get that level of print size, you might not have to enlarge quite as much on the bigger screen, depending on how things are set up. And also, if you are using it as an actual magnifying glass, using one of the magnifying apps, you are again using a tablet being presented with a much larger screen on which to magnify things. So you might have a 10-inch handheld magnifier in a tablet, whereas your phone might be a 5 or a 6-inch screen, depending on what sort it is. So there are potentially advantages to having that sort of same technology delivered through the vehicle of a tablet, as opposed to being delivered through the vehicle of a smartphone. So it's just another thing to consider when you're looking at that smartphone versus tablet type scenario. The Android and the iPhone accessibility features are the same on both, so to speak. Okay.
Can I just add something there, Mark?
Yeah.
Particularly with Google, it does remember or acknowledge if you are using some sort of other device. So if you log into another device with that's say if you buy a new smartphone and you log in using your Google account details, it will automatically know what access requirements you've got. So if you use talkback, it will initiate talkback. If you use magnification, it will give you that option as well. So that's just something to bear in mind as well.
Okay. Yeah, these things are good in that they sort of they sync themselves across all of the different devices that you use. You know, and it's the same principle with iPhone, really. Again, once you've got your account set up, you can sort of synchronize between your phone and your tablet, you know, which does make things you know, really quite nice. And certainly as well, when you upgrade your device and you upgrade your settings from one to the other, again, it will bring across those settings. Okay. All right, so that's that's a really quick flavour in terms of the smartphone and tablet enlargement. Has anybody got any sort of questions around that before we sort of move on to have a bit of a chat about the PC side of things?
May I ask a question?
Yeah, of course you can. Hello, Padma.
Apple magnification, the same thing applies to phone, Apple phone, as well as iPad.
Yes, with magnification. Yeah, so it's exactly the same. You've got within the accessibility settings, you have you have what is called zoom. Okay.
Yeah.
So I've got it here on my screen. So rather than with this, rather than using the 2 fingers to move around, as I do with Android, I'm going to use 3 to move around. Yeah. So again, I'm using 3 fingers to move around as opposed to 2. In the same way, also, it's got the different regions, so you can either have full screen or you can have the window zoom. And again, with my window zoom, again, I'm just demonstrating here. It's really hard to do. I wish I had a stand for this. I can use my little window to move around the screen, to move up and down and see what is underneath the enlarged area.
One problem I have, when I get an email, whether on the phone or iPad, if I want to enlarge the address at the top, I can't do that, can I?
You raise an interesting question, because I think when we talked about enlarging the actual fonts earlier on, when you enlarge the fonts, some apps work with it better than others. So, for example, let me turn my enlargement off. So if I go into an email, what happens is I've got my actual text. Certain areas of the text have been enlarged, but other areas, depending on how the email has been sent out, haven't been. So one of the functions you can do with Android is something called select to speak. So you can just make it speak a certain area you can make it speak a certain part of the screen. So it's like it's almost like, you might want to call it, for want of a better expression, it's almost like a talkback light, in the sense of you're only speaking out a certain bit of it at that time. So it's almost part way between what Karina was saying to Ray about using screen enlargement and talkback at the same time, whereas you can just get it to actually speak certain bits of it.
Device. I have only Apple device.
Ah, right. You've just got Apple, haven't you? Yeah. So I suppose in that sense, that's where you could just bring VoiceOver in.
On an Apple device, is there any way I can enlarge just the email address?
What do you do at the moment? Have you just got the fonts larger
Yes.
Right.
But
So
because I depend on a screen reader and the voiceover, I need to see the address of the sender.
right, yeah. So you're wanting to look at so there's a couple of ways you can do it. One of the if you're just using VoiceOver and you just want
Yeah.
to enlarge that particular area of the
That's right,
screen,
yeah.
then you can use the zoom feature. You can use the actual the screen enlargement on the phone, so you can zoom into that particular area of the screen in order to
How
be
do
able
I
to.
zoom in?
So that would be in your accessibility. You would switch your zoom on, and that's where you're using the three fingers to
Oh, I see.
to
Yeah.
move around.
Thank you. Yeah, I got it. Thank you.
What I would strongly suggest in terms of that area is with the zoom switched on, okay, you can enable something called the zoom controller, and what that is, it's like a little floating square that comes over the screen. So when I release it, it goes back to normal size screen, but when I press it, it enlarges. So I can flick it on and flick
Yeah,
it
thank
off
you.
really,
I
really
got it.
quickly. And then it means that when you're just hovering over a particular part of the screen, you get that real bit of enlargement comes in very, very quickly for that
Yeah.
particular area. So I would experiment with it, but I would experiment with it with the zoom controller switched on, because it's a really useful, if you wanted to go quick burst, see something, that's a really useful one. But obviously if you get stuck, we can always sort of have a chat about those things later on. Okay,
Thank you.
not a problem at
Thank-
all. Okay, then. So are we all right to kick on? Because I'm just sort of little conscious a bit of time, and we'll see how we do in terms of questions at the end. But we're gonna have a look at the enlargement now that's available through the PC through Windows Magnifier. Magnifier. Yes, I can say it properly. Stop laughing at me, Karina. Come on, then. You're going to tell them about it anyway, and then I'm going to play a video.
What's it called, Mark?
It's called Windows Magnifier.
Right. So so okay. So Windows Magnifier is the inbuilt magnification software for Microsoft Windows. And the first thing I'd like to say is that it has come on massively from where it was. So a few years ago, it was very, very primitive. You could only magnify a certain amount. It wouldn't allow you to do very much with it. Now, I would strongly suggest that it is comparable to other magnification packages that are available on the market. So Windows Magnifier, it can be activated through the settings, and it's in the ease of access center within the control panel, and that will then open another window once you've enabled Magnifier, and that window, will enable you to change the settings within Magnifier. So again, it will allow you to do similar things to what you've used previously. So it will allow you to use different types of mouse pointers, different cursors, so different shaped cursors. It will also allow you to set how it follows what's going on. So it might be that it follows the cursor, or it follows the mouse pointer, and it allows you to set different rates at which it will react and respond. Again, you can change the background color. So you can what's called invert colours. Now that automatically changes or reverts the colours, which can pose slight difficulties if you need to look at pictures, or if you're reading or want to read something that's on naturally a dark background, because it will then present on the light background. So but as I say, it is very, very customizable. So to start Windows now you can automatically start Magnifier, and depending on if you're using it in a work environment, you can ask Magnifier to start before you log on, so it will automatically enlarge the logon screen, or you can ask it to start once you've logged on. So once it's loaded, once Windows is loaded, it will then be magnified and ready. The other good thing with Magnifier as well is the increments in which you can magnify. Now, ordinarily, it goes up in hundreds of percents, but that can be changed within the settings so that it will magnify at less increments. So you can set it to magnify the level to which you want. Now, what I do personally is I have the magnification bar around, just so that if I do need to increase or decrease or go into the settings quickly, it's there and it's easy and it's accessible. It can also sit within your system tray, so it can be at the bottom. And that's where you can start it from. You can also start Magnifier as well by opening the start menu and just typing in mag, and that will open, and then pressing enter, and that will open Magnifier.
And a really quick way, and I think this is what makes it so liberating actually. If you hold down the Windows key and press plus, it will start then as well. So hold down the Windows key, press plus, keep pressing plus, it will magnify. Windows key and minus, and it starts to dip it back down.
Yeah.
Which is great, because it then means if you go onto a computer of a friend or a colleague at work, or provided even if you go into a public computer in a library, provided they haven't locked the feature down, which unfortunately some of them do, you can just do Windows key and plus and very, very quickly get that screen enlargement. It's really, really powerful. Do you want me to play that little video, Karina, just to?
Yes, you can do. Yeah.
Right, I don't know how well this is going to work, because obviously what we wanted to try and do was show you magnification. But of course, if we just magnify the screen, our own screens, that wouldn't come out through Zoom. So the only way we could do it was just to make a little bit of video, which I'm just gonna sort of quickly play for you now. Right, okay. Video to demonstrate some of the principles during this session. I'm going to demonstrate them using Windows Magnifier, which I'm activating now. Now that I've activated it, it's magnifying the screen in the full screen mode. And as I increase the level of magnification, I see an ever smaller area of the screen. Decreasing it means I see more. Now obviously this presents challenges in locating where I am within the context of the whole screen. Pushing my mouse to the top left-hand corner always gets me back to where I need to be, i.e. the starting point top left. Another option is to use a lens. Now switching to the lens gives in effect what is like a magnifying glass hovering over a page, in that I still see the whole of the screen, and as I move my cursor around, I magnify what is underneath the cursor, in effect like a lens on a piece of paper. And that's a different approach. Again, depending upon your level of vision, you may prefer one or the other, but in reality, try both. Okay, so I'll stop screen sharing now. Hopefully that came out with a little bit of audio, but that sort of reinforces those principles that we were talking about earlier on, in the sense of you're either magnifying the whole of the screen, so you're looking at, you're looking at a quarter, 4 times magnification, 8 times magnification, 12, whatever level you need. And of course, as you up the level of magnification, you're seeing an ever smaller part of the screen at any one time, which is naturally going to impact on your speed in terms of reading and your ability to locate overall where you are. Anything else you wanted to add, Karina, before we sort of briefly talk about its reading feature, which I'm going to try and play in as well?
No, not really. It does work with screen readers. So whether you use it with JAWS or whether you use it with NVDA, either as your primary use or as a backup use to support you, it is compatible with both. The other thing as well, and this might be handy for Windows tablet users, is that it does also work with the pen that you get with the things like Surface Pro tablets as well.
Okay. So one of the things, and I think actually this sort of will hopefully relate to some of what Padma was asking about earlier on, in terms of the iPhone, is that very often with so many of these things, it's about using one thing alongside another. Now, one of the really neat things about Windows Magnifier now is that from Windows 10 onwards, and that was a point really, from partway through Windows 10 onwards, it had the additional feature of being able to read aloud from a certain point. So you could hover the cursor over an area and with a keystroke get it to read aloud. So I'm going to just do a little demonstration of that. I tried to record it again, but the problem is that I had issues with the software wouldn't pick up the mic. So apologies for the age of this. It is a little bit old because it does talk. It was a video I did actually during lockdown when I was demonstrating this for our some of our sort of service users as a work. So it's a little bit old, but you will get the principle, and the actual technique that's used is still current, and it is actually a really neat feature. So just give me a second just to put this on, and we'll hopefully get. If I hold down my Control key, my Alt key, and press my left-hand mouse button with my cursor over a word, let's just see what happens.
During the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 and 2021, we have moved our services so they can be accessed virtually over the internet or your phone.
So that's just a really quick demonstration. Again, if you're wanting to, you're looking at a newspaper website for argument's sake, and you want to read the article, or you just, as Padma says, you want to identify a certain bit of a certain document, and reading is starting to become quite tiring because you've done a lot of it already, or you spent trying to find your mouse, etc. Just having that, what I call spot reading. It's not a full screen reader. It's not JAWS, but it's just very, potentially really helpful if you do want to just do that little bit of reading. So
what was the command for that, Mark? What was the shortcut for that?
Yeah, so the shortcut for that, Control, Alt, and the left mouse button.
Yeah.
It's a really, really neat feature. And provided the Windows 10 computer is up to date, it will work.
Right.
On Windows 11, it'll work as standard. They brought it out partway through Windows 10. Okay. All right, then. So before we move on to the final section, which is just to briefly think about why you might go for one of the paid alternatives, are there any sort of questions so far on this bit? Okay, all right then. So we'll move on to the final bit, which is why would you go for some of the paid alternatives? Now, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the paid alternatives. I mean, essentially there are two. You've got Supernova, which is by Dolphin Systems, and you've got Zoom Text, which is by Freedom Scientific. So essentially, they all tend to have three levels. So with Supernova, you've got the Supernova magnifier, which is just what it says on the tin. It's Supernova just with magnification. So something like that, you're starting at £345. Zoom Text do the same thing, which is like the Zoom Text magnifier for around 500. And then what you get with both products is you get a magnifier and speech option. So you get the magnifier, but you also get the speech as well. Supernova do that, as do Zoom Text. Now you then get the magnifier with the fully fledged screen reader. So in terms of Supernova, that's called magnifier and screen reader. So that's the fully fledged screen reader. And with Zoom Text, it ceases to be Zoom Text because that's when it becomes Fusion, because in effect it's Zoom Text plus JAWS rolled together as Fusion. So if you're looking for the full shebang there, with Zoom Text Fusion, you're looking at over £1,300. Okay, so obviously it is a much more expensive product, but as I say, it depends on the level that you actually want. Okay, so I suppose the question is, why would you do it? Why would you go for one of the paid options? And for me, really, it's two things. The first thing is image quality, and the second thing is probably the range of added features. Image quality, first of all, with things like Supernova and Zoom Text, the quality of the enlargement that they produce is superior to Windows Magnifier. It is much sharper. It's much sharper. You can do things like sharpen the fonts. The image itself is clearer. Now, again, the extent to which that affects you naturally is going to be determined by the nature of your vision. Some people might not notice it at all. Other people, it might become very apparent. And, you know, as I say, that's, in all honesty, it's as individual as you are. I would say the second bit is the range of the added features and just what you can do with them. With both of them, you've much more control. It's very, very quick. If I want to do Windows Magnifier and to get it back to where I need it to be, I've got to do Windows key and escape to get rid of it, and then I've got to do Windows key and plus to get it back on. With Zoom Text or Supernova, it's a very quick keystroke. It reacts really, really quickly, on, off, really, really quick. Things like the document reader, it's got inbuilt document reader. So again, you can sort of, you heard my example earlier on. It's great. It will read bits from the screen. Fantastic. But it's not a full-blown document reader in the way that the other packages have. What they also do as well is they've got much more control in terms of how you set up various areas of magnification. So, for example, let's say you're in a work scenario, you want to have an area of the screen set up because you know that your notifications always coming in the bottom right hand corner, for argument's sake. You can set that up so that area is always magnified. You've got lots of choice over color filters and the different ways in which the cursor highlights things. So there's lots of flexibility. They also have various things like Supernova. What it will do is it will allow you to link through to a camera. So, for example, let's say you're in education and you want to enlarge what's on the whiteboard in the classroom, or the smart board probably nowadays. You can have that enlarged as well. Or if you want to enlarge a document, if you're working in administration, for argument's sake, and you've got a document at the side of you, you can have like dual screen where you've got camera and the Supernova enlarged screen, and it's the same with Zoom text. And they also do things like scanning as well. So again, you can upload a PDF, or you can take a picture and it'll OCR all of those. So they do have a much wider range of features. It's probably fair to say that other packages will do those things as well, or certainly things like the scanning, etc. They will. So it really depends on what it is that you need to do, and I would say the extent to which you need it all to be in one place, and ultimately, what you're able to pay. Obviously, it's a very, very different situation if you're buying this stuff through your own budget when compared to if you're getting it through access to work, or if you're an education disabled students allowance. So there's lots of considerations. Again, it's like both. It's like all of these things. I would say try it, because Supernova do a 30-day free demo. Zoom text, just like JAWS, have a 40-minute demo. So it runs for 40 minutes and then it switches off, and then you start it up again. Start the computer, it runs for another 40 minutes and then it switches off. It's a bit of a pain, but you so can get through a day eventually by doing that, but I wouldn't recommend it forever. But as I say, people do say, well, why would I want to bother with a paid alternative now when the inbuilt ones are there? And it's that same argument, really, narrator versus JAWS, or with a screen reader. It's that extra functionality, really, and the extent to which that extra functionality is important to you or not. I don't know, have I missed anything there, Karina? Any things that I should be adding?
No, can I just add, though, that there is a feature within Windows now. So say if you're connecting your machine, your laptop, if you're using a laptop and you're connecting it to a bigger monitor, you can select just to say have your laptop screen magnified.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah, because you get all sorts of again with Zoom text and Supernova, you get some fairly advanced things there in terms of the ability to manage dual monitors. And I mean, again, I know some people that do work with low vision using dual monitors, and for some people that works very well. I mean, I tried it; it's bad enough trying to use one monitor, let alone two. So I gave it up as a bad job. But again, it's what you need. It's what works for you, really. Yeah. So I don't know whether anyone's got any questions in relation to those bits, or given that we're towards the last sort of 10 minutes of things now, whether there's anything sort of more widely, you want us to go back to, or that you'd like us to have covered that we've not covered, or let's open the floor. Ray, go for it, Ray.
Yeah, okay, sorry.
That's all right.
I wasn't getting useful feedback from NVDA.
Oh.
Yeah, it's going back to smartphones.
Yep.
Customization. Speaking to people, I get the impression that there's more scope and flexibility with the Android systems than there is with an iPhone, which seems to be more of a locked system. Is this true? And if so, could you give examples? Because my basic needs, that iPhone just seems to have a lot of flexibility. You know, you can do all sorts with the speech feedback, with what you're seeing on the screen. And I'm just wondering, what are these so-called enhanced customization features that Android has, which allegedly the Apple system doesn't?
I mean, with all of them now, you can. It depends on what you're wanting to do. With all of them now, there's very little difference between what the two respective speech packages, talkback versus voiceover, will actually do. They both have similar capabilities. When you sort of talking about a more of a closed system, where Apple becomes more of a closed system is that Apple sort of probably much more tightly control the quality of the apps that become available. Whereas with Android, you can, should you wish to, although I wouldn't necessarily recommend this, go and download apps and install them completely outside the Google environment of their Play Store, which is like the equivalent of the Apple's App Store. So you can sort of, you've got more sort of openness, if you like, about what you can do with it. But I suppose, that sort of begs the question about what is it that you're actually wanting to do with it. If you're wanting to, if you're wanting to do BBC iPlayer is going to work pretty much the same on an iPhone as it does on an Android. Yeah. Or if you wanted to do, your emails, again, same difference. It's only if you wanted to, sort of push the boundaries perhaps a little bit more in terms of some of the apps, but. Yeah,
but as you say, you'd be a fool to go outside of the Google Play Store.
I would never recommend that, because essentially somebody could give you a file for an app, and it's the only time I've ever used it is when I worked in education, and some apps were developed specifically for education that had to be downloaded outside of that because there were sort of test apps that were being done. But that's the only time I ever did it. I would never recommend that. You can get a reasonable Samsung Android phone for sub £200, if not a bit less, as new, and obviously less than that used. A new iPhone, even if you get in the SEs, are going to cost you, for about £450. So it just depends on what people's situation is, doesn't it? Really, because but then at the other end of the spectrum, the top of the range Samsung and the top of the range iPhones are both going to cost you £1,400. So it's just that continuum of where you want to go, how much you're prepared to spend, and what you want to do.
Yeah.
But Nigel, I don't know if you have anything you wanted to ask.
Hello,
you all right?
Yes, what I was going to say, the question that came up about the difference between Android and Apple apps, my feedback there would be on Android, and I'll give an example. I was recently looking for a magnifier on my Android phone, and what I found was, in comparing Android against Apple, on Android, when I went on the Google Play Store and I did a search for magnifiers, there was 30 plus developers all developing magnifiers. Most of them were free. Some of them were available for a small fee, £2.99, £4.99. On Apple, it was maybe half a dozen. So again, my experience has been is when you're comparing Apple against Android, because it is more open, you do seem to have many more developers all doing the same thing. And I must admit, when it comes to choosing a magnifier for my purposes, because of the level of vision I have, I needed a magnifier that would invert colors so that I can inverse colors for reading text, etc. That's absolutely fundamental for me. So when I tried some of the free magnifiers, surprisingly, they didn't invert colors. So that was a waste of time for me. So in the end, I actually chose a magnifier for my Android phone. That was an outrageous £2.99, but it does everything I want it to do. And what's nice is that the range of color filters on there is great. So I can take, say, I get a document come through the post, a letter, and I can literally put that document, single page letter on the desk, put my phone over the top of it, and I can take a picture and save it. But then I can then read it as green on black, yellow on black, all range of colors. And that to me was what I wanted. And for £2.99, it's a fantastic tool.
Yeah. Can I also recommend WeZoom to you, Nigel? That's actually free as well. And I'm just cycling through it now. I've got the natural colours. I've got black on white, white on black. I've got yellow. I've got blue. So that's another nice one as well. WeZoom, and that's a free one on Android. What if you've got a Samsung? The Samsung has got their own on the later versions of Samsung. It depends on what model depending on what phone you've got. They've also got a magnifier as well, because it's confusing. Because when you accessibility, you've got magnification, which is a screen enlargement, and then you got magnifier, which is the actual magnifying glass. So, WeZoom I would recommend, or also depending on which Samsung one, you might have another one there.
Yes.
But yeah, I think it's thanks for that. I think it's a really interesting point in terms of the range of different apps that you get.
Yeah, I mean, certainly from my experience, comparing Apple against Android, they just seem to have many more people all doing the same task. It's almost like going into a supermarket and saying, do I buy the discount version or the branded version? And as I've learned with Android, you can go for the cheaper end and still end up with a pretty good product.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And any other thoughts?
The only other thing I was going to say, the screen magnifiers. I think that was covered really well, and I would say that certainly with my level of vision, if you need to do emails, I find 10 minutes of reading, even with a magnifier on a phone, is very tiring. So from that point alone, definitely going for a tablet. And I've got an Android tablet, which is a 10-inch screen. And again, in dark mode or dark theme, and that works for me. And then yes, using the talk back to give me the further assistance. I mean, pretty much all those things enable me to carry on as much as I can. I've just started recently using a Windows 10 laptop again, but I must admit, with an Android tablet, I'm pretty much doing everything there with the screen magnifier. And of course, with the later versions of Android, where you can divide the screen into like a quadrant, so you can zoom in on an area, that's really fantastic. I give you a good example where you can zoom in on an area of the screen using the banking apps, for example. Some days when my vision's really bad, I need to enlarge the screen. But if I'm looking at, say, a bank transaction, the fact that I can use like a quadrant or a quarter of the screen and then zoom in on that area, it means I can still use that app and be independent. So the magnifier and the facility to have a quadrant, is really, really good, essential in actual fact. Yeah,
and I think you make a great point in terms of the bits of reading as well. Actually, sometimes we all do it, don't we? Sometimes do you know what? I just want it read to me.
Yeah.
And actually, in the same way, I don't know if you use things like Seeing AI, because now that's available on Android, or look out by Google, and I find myself doing that. I got just something today. It was a receipt, and I thought it was just too small. Like, it was a bit dark, and I could be honest, I couldn't be bothered. So I thought, all right, I'll just get Seeing AI, and I just got Seeing AI to read it for me.
Yes, I was going to say,
in terms of printed material.
I noticed you mentioned the Google app for reading out documents, etc.
Yeah.
Going back to last summer, my wife and I were at Stonehenge, and we went round the museum there. And like many museums, I really struggled because they're, for me anyway, they're very poorly lit. And using the the camera, and we Google, I was able to get it to read out the descriptions of items and that we were looking at when we were in the museum, and it gave me a level of independence. And I had quite a few other customers saying to me, "Oh, how are you managing to do that?" And it's like just the Android accessibility on my phone that's doing it for me, but it's using the camera. Yeah, definitely.
It's great. It's just great. That stuff is just so liberating. And it's to what we do. When my wife and I, we the same when we go somewhere, we'll just read it. I was reading like plaques on a pier once as well. It was actually reading these plaques, even though like they're engraved and just on the edge of the pier, it's still reading them. It's just amazing.
Yeah, sometimes it does pick up things that you never ever thought would exist.
I didn't even know they were there. That's the thing. A lot of the time.
Exactly.
Yeah. Excellent.
Yeah.
I
All
think
right, then.
I was going to say the last thing is the one of the best tips I ever had, which I pass on to you all, is when you're using public transport, and that's always a nightmare at the best of times. And one of the best tips I ever had was I was saying to a lady that was pretty much same as me, about 10% vision, and I said to her, when you're at a railway station, trying to read display boards is such a nightmare. Getting onto the right platform and then reading the actual display is just such a challenge. And the simple solution that was given to me, well, just point your phone camera at the display and keep taking pictures, and then once you've got the pictures, then look at them one by one. And of course, obviously, when you save them as a photograph, you can zoom in and out, and of course, hopefully one of those pictures will be the display with the details of your train. And that was one of the most valuable tips I've ever been given.
Yeah, because then you're not trying to hold the phone up, keep it steady, still looking at the things. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, excellent. All right, then. Well, look, we're just after 9 o'clock, so we're at the time of closing it now. But obviously, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. Karina, I don't know if you have any sort of parting things or.
Yeah, no, just to say thank you for joining us, and I hope you found it interesting and informative.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Well,
thanks both for the presentation and fielding the questions as well.
It's quite all right.
No
Thanks.
problem.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.
And we'll see you on the next one.
Yeah.
I'll stop the recording now.